Chapter 8, the 18th emergency. Garbage Dog had not been inside a house for years. He hesitated at the door, and then, when Mouse pushed him, he entered. He walked around the edge of the room, avoiding the carpet, until he came to the kitchen. Then he sat uneasily by the table. There was a little hot air blowing on him from under the refrigerator, and this worried him, so he moved over to the sink. "What do you want to eat, boy?" Mouse asked. "Sandwich all right?" Garbage Dog's nose started to run as soon as the refrigerator door was open. He got up, moved forward, and looked into the brightly lit box. He could smell meatloaf and lasagna and cheese, and then everything blended into a general food smell, which was even better. He waited without moving, his eyes riveted onto the refrigerator. Mouse gathered up the lasagna, shut the refrigerator door with his shoulder, and got bread from the counter. "Yeah," he said. Garbage Dog was accustomed to little tidbits, crusts of bread and pieces of broken cookies, the dry ends of ice cream cones. He hardly ever got a whole sandwich. He took it in his mouth and stood for a moment, looking at Mouse. Then he went into the table and began to eat. He finished quickly and came back. He stood looking from Mouse to the refrigerator. "How about bacon?" Mouse asked. He broke bread into a small bowl and poured some bacon grease over it. He was sprinkling this with grated cheese when his mother came into the apartment. "Benji? I'm in here, Mum." He set the bowl on the floor. "Well, I hope you aren't here because... what's that dog doing in here?" "I had to let him come up," Mouse said. "He followed me." "Well, I don't want dogs in here. You should know that. As soon as he finishes, take him out." "If he'll go, he follows me everywhere." "Out." She went into the living room and said, "And don't you eat anything, because Mrs. Casino's giving you supper." He followed her quickly into the living room. Behind him came Garbage Dog, sliding a little on his short legs. Garbage Dog stepped over on the carpet by accident, and then quickly walked over and stood by the front door, looking worried. "Where are you going?" Mouse asked his mother. "I've got that cosmetics party," she said. His mother went to people's houses and showed them cosmetics, and people bought them. It occurred to Mouse that he'd always wanted to see what went on at these parties. So he quickly said, "I could go with you, I could..." "You know, that's out of the question." "I wouldn't be any trouble. Nobody would even know I was there." "No." "But I want to go." "I've already told you. Miss Casino will come. Now, I've got about 2 seconds to get dressed. Where's my new recorder? Have you seen it?" She went into her room, and Mouse walked to the front door where Garbage Dog was waiting. Garbage Dog still looked uneasy. "Come on, you've got to go, boy," Mouse said, letting his shoulders slump. Eagerly, Garbage Dog went out the door and down the stairs. "You just have to go, that's all. There's nothing I can do." Mouse came slowly back up the stairs as his mother was leaving. He waited on the landing for a moment, watching her go, and then he decided he didn't want to go back into the apartment and be by himself. Sighing, he crossed the landing and knocked at the casino's door. "Miss Casino, it's me, Benji Farley." "Come in, Benji." She opened the door. "Come in, don't mind me. I'm cooking." "Guess I'm early." "Well, that's good. You can play checkers with Papa. Come on in. He's so lonely these days. That man..." Mouse interrupted. "I'm really not very good at checkers. I've hardly played since 4th grade. He wanted, suddenly, very much to sit in the warm kitchen and watch Miss Casino cook. She had a comforting manner about her. If he had said, "Miss Casino, some boys are trying to kill me," she wouldn't have wasted time asking why, and "What did you do?" She would have cried, "Where are those boys? Show me those boys!" She would have yanked on her man's sweater, taken her broom in hand, and gone out into the street to find them. "Show me those boys!" He had a brief, pleasant picture of Mrs. Casino cornering Marv Hammer in the alley and raining blows on him with her broom. "You ain't touching my donk, Benji, smack!" There was nothing comforting about sitting with Mr. Casino. Mouse had already told him about the boys being after him and had gotten no reaction at all. Mouse could see Mr. Casino sitting in the other room. He stood in the doorway with Mr. Casino and he hesitated. As he was standing there, he thought of something that had happened in school in the past week. Mrs. Tennant had brought movies of her Christmas vacation to school, and had shown them to her class. And when she had shown everything that had happened to her and her sister in Mexico, she then reversed film, and they got to see everything happen in reverse. They got to see Mrs. Tarrant walking backwards into the hotel and into the bullfight. They got to see her sister walking backwards through a marketplace. They got to see a funny-looking taxi driver backwards. And people eating backwards, man driving backwards up on a high cliff. And they all laughed because there was something about people walking backwards in that bright, skillful, cheerful way that was funny. Suddenly, that was what Mouse wanted to happen now. He wanted to walk backwards out of the casino's apartment. He wanted to walk backwards to the basketball court, and then to school, reversing everything he had done in a bright, cheerful way. He wanted to move backwards through Thursday too, and he especially wanted to walk all the way back to when he had come out of history class and pause by the prehistoric man charts. He wanted to stop everything right there. He would have paused a second, and in that second, he would have not have lifted his hand to write Marv Hammerman's name, and then the world could go forward again. He felt Mrs. Casino urging him into the room. So he said reluctantly, "I haven't played checkers in years. I'm not even sure I remember." "Oh, you're good enough. Go on, go on." Miss Casino took him firmly by the shoulders and pushed him into the room where Miss Casino was sitting by the window. "Papa's just learning checkers over again anyway," she said. Mouse crossed the room, dragging his feet. "Hi, Mr. Casino," in a low, unenthusiastic voice, because he wanted to be with somebody. He was lonely. "I, Mouse Farley, do hereby swear that I feel very lonely." He thought he would have to make a declaration of it to make people understand. "How are you, Mr. Casino?" he asked in the same flat voice. "He's fine, aren't you, Papa?" Miss Casino said. She patted Mr. Casino on the shoulders as she passed by behind his chair. Mouse sat down. Mr. Casino was in an armchair, and the bottom had sunk so low that Mouse in his straight chair was the taller of the two. "Here you go." Miss Casino brought out the checkers, the oldest set Mouse had ever seen, and she set it on the table. The black and red board had been worn white, where the checkers had been moved across it. When she put it down, Miss Casino reached out slowly with worn, enormous hands, his fingers trembling a little, as if the distance from the armrest of his chair to the box of checkers was long and hazardous. "I'll set these up," Mouse said. "I can do it better." Quickly, efficiently, he put the checkers in the squares, his and Miss Casino's. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Go ahead, Miss Casino." He could hear the impatience in his own voice. He glanced up at Miss Casino, who was still standing by the door, drying her already dry hands on her apron. Then, quickly, Mouse looked back at the checkerboard, because he had seen something in Mrs. Casino's eyes. It was just a flash of something, a cloud over the sun, a sadness, and it bothered him. She said, "He's supposed to use his left hand as much as possible." "Oh," Mouse said. He wanted to explain that the reasoning he was acting this way was because he had beat the impossible burden of being chased by Marv Hammerman. He wanted Mrs. Casino's sympathy. "Mrs. Casino," he wanted to say, "if you only knew what it's like to have Marv Hammerman out to get you." He felt tears stinging his eyes, and he knew he was not going to tell Mrs. Casino, and that he was not going to tell anybody else either. "Your move," he said loudly to Miss Casino. He shifted in his chair, and then abruptly he slumped. He had suddenly thought back to that moment outside history class, when he had turned and looked round and seen Hammerman. That first moment. It was what had been troubling him all along. It wasn't entirely clear. It was as if a fog had lifted. Still, Mouse could remember the way that Hammerman's eyes had looked in that first unguarded moment. There hadn't been enough fog to blot that out. Mouse thought again about the moment in the hall. It had been flitting in and out his mind like a moth for 2 days. Now he made himself think about it. He sank lower into his chair, because he knew now what troubled him. He had felt somehow close to Hammerman in that first terrible moment. He had known how Hammerman felt. It had been the same way that he felt the time everyone first started calling him Mouse. They had been united for a moment, Mouse and Neanderthal Man. "You can have the first move, Mr. Casino," he said in a low voice. Mouse sat for a moment, and then Miss Casino made a gesture with his fingers like he was flicking a fly off the armrest. Mrs. Casino said. He wants you to go first, Benji. She was still patting the backs of her dry hands on her apron. Oh, sure. Okay. He looked at the board as if the decision was one of the most important of his life. The checkers were thin and wooden, and dark in the centre from the sweat of people's fingers. They were clear for a moment, and then they blurred a little. Mouse reached out and pushed one forward. Before they got so blurred he couldn't find them. He leaned back in his chair. The late afternoon sun was coming in the window, and the dust in the sunlight gave him a sad, old-timey feeling. He thought that if he closed his eyes, he would not be able to tell even what century he was in. It could be 100 years ago, and he would still be sitting here in an old-timey suit with a tie. It could be 1,000 years ago. It was that kind of timeless feeling. Some things, he thought as he stared down at the checkerboard, just don't change. He remembered how he used to enjoy looking through books that showed the old and the new, the Wright brothers plane opposed to a jet plane, or an old Victrola opposed to a hi-fi set. Looking at pictures like that always made him feel superior, as if he had advanced in the same way as the machines. But he felt different now. He thought of all the people who had ever lived as being run through by a single thread, like beads. Well, I'll get back to my cooking if you don't mind. No, we'll be fine. He looked at Mr. Casino, who was reaching out slowly. He was still a large man, but he had once been enormous, and everything he was wearing was too big for him. The cuffs of his shirt came down over his hands. The cotton pants were gathered at the waist with his belt. Mouse watched, waiting, and he was very sad, while Mr. Casino pushed one of his checkers forward with a trembling hand. My turn, Mouse said. He bent forward over the board, and in the kitchen, Mrs. Casino started to sing. Outside, two men were arguing about baseball. A bus passed. Mrs. Casino started on a Western song. Mouse tried not to think of anything but the checker game. He said self-consciously. Oh, I've got to jump. He took it and leaned back in his chair. It was a long, slow game. The first game Mouse had ever played in which he didn't seem important who the winner was, or rather a game in which both players were winners. Do you want to play again? Mouse said. He waited a minute, and then he pushed all the checkers across to Mr. Casino, and said gently, You set them up this time, will you? That is the end of chapter 8.